Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our session on preserving the nonprofit legacy in senior living. This webinar is part of Lutheran Services in America's Strength and Service series that's designed specifically to look at the key issues of today with the goal of moving organizations forward. I'm delighted today to welcome and introduce our two speakers today, both from Ziegler. First is Dan Hermann, President and CEO of Ziegler. And then Lisa McCracken, Director of Senior Living Research and Development. And as you know, Ziegler is a strong partner of ours and is a privately held investment bank in capital markets and investment firm that specializes in senior living, healthcare, and education services. And we all know that there's a whole wave of complexity that's hitting the senior services space. And Dan and Lisa are going to share some trends. They're going to ask some provocative questions and really highlight what providers need to consider as we continue to move forward. So we will have time at the end for Q&A, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat box so that Dan and Lisa can answer them later. And you will all be receiving a copy of this presentation as well. Dan and Lisa, turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to present again and greatly appreciate our relationship with LSA and all the good work you do across the country in social services, all of you as members, but also the senior living providers. And we work with a number of you around the country, so we really do appreciate that. I'm just going to touch on a brief overview of Ziegler for a minute to ground you on how we gather this information and our presence in the not-for-profit senior living market. Then Lisa, as our head of research, is going to frame the sector's not-for-profit heritage to remind all of us of the roots of where you all came from as organizations and agencies. Then we'll focus specifically in on Lutheran-sponsored senior living and care today in the real world and how Lutheran-sponsored senior living organizations are positioned in the market. And then I'll take over as we look ahead to understanding the future of the not-for-profit landscape and how Lutheran-sponsored organizations can be positioned in today's marketplace. If you go to the next slide. As a quick reminder, we actually were founded by a Lutheran family, the Zieglers, in 1902 in West Bend, Wisconsin. Wonderful family that did great things and founded many businesses, including West Bend Pots and Pans, if you didn't know that heritage. In addition to Ziegler, we're now 185 professionals focused on healthcare and senior living, based here in Chicago with offices around the country in capital markets, investment banking, and proprietary investments with our Ziegler linkage funds and a number of other funds like that we've done. We point out our offices here so you know that we're touching all of you around the country with our team members that many of you know. I know some folks are on from the Northwest today, for example, that know our West Coast team. And we have folks on from the Mid-Atlantic that know our Mid-Atlantic team and, of course, in the Midwest. So we cover the whole country. And our banking team brings back that information to Lisa as we pull trends from every state in the country because, as we know, they're all different. And we are in the leader in debt financing, as you can see here, and have been for years. And we serve about 50% of the market and very proud of that service to not-for-profit senior living. But we're going to note that the growth of the sector has slowed down today, and that's one of the things we want to highlight. You do see, just real quick, if we go back one page, I did want to note the logos. Many of the Lutheran organizations we've served, we've done over 100 financings for Lutheran organizations over the years. You see 81 here, but we actually did another 30 before 1990. So when we go to talk about multi-facility organizations, you can see some single sites on this page, but also some multi-facility organizations that have evolved over the last 2 decades, and we'll be highlighting that. Next page. And then Lisa is our head of research and leads that effort, and we do view ourselves as thought leaders in the sector. Lisa, do you want to make a few comments there?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be referring to some of these documents and white papers and research sources throughout as we get into particularly some of the Lutheran-specific data and where we gather that from. But you know that after this, we can always do a deeper dive into any one of these areas if you have follow-up information that you would like to see. So, yeah, this is just a good overview just in terms of calendars. Our next big event that we're looking ahead to is the first week of October, our Finance and Strategy Conference in person in Tucson, Arizona.
I will note, because we mentioned those Ziegler linkage funds, we just now have cemented a date to get together in this office for those of you that are in the fund, and that is an education innovative and does look to the future. And that will be Thursday, September 9th in our Chicago office for those of you that are part of the Ziegler Linkage Funds. Looking forward to seeing people and getting together. Okay, Lisa.
Yeah. So we want to start off with framing the sector's not-for-profit heritage. And this is really just a grounding point, you know, as we talk about sort of where we've come from, where we are today, and what the future looks like, particularly framed around this not-for-profit sort of faith-based sponsorship conversation. So, you know, what you can see in front of you, and you're going to see some really interesting pictures to come in the next few slides, is, you know your heritage with your organizations, and really the Lutherans, just as much as any, if not more than a number of the other faith-based sponsored, providers, have a really deep history. I mean, when you go back to your organizations, we're talking 100 plus, 125 plus years, 150 years. And it's really phenomenal when you look back to that heritage. So, you know, as a sector, when we talk about care and services for older adults, it has been very much a not-for-profit built and developed and service from organizations like yourself. So whether that you were founded through a church or congregation, you know, a lot of your histories are the donated lands or estates from certain individuals. As you know, and some of this was a function of the time, it was a lot of a focus on the orphans, given the need, you know, coming out of the war, orphans and widows, some in the hospitals and asylums. So it's funny when you talk about name changes, you know, we've gone through that phase in recent years around name changes, but that's not a new thing for many of us. When you look at the homes, some of these pictures, you'll see the footnotes of the original names of many of your founding communities or homes, and it's a fascinating history to take a look at. So, you know, but, you know, while many of you are still in the care, you know, maybe on the social services front, the children and youth side of things, you know, a little bit more of a transition away from the orphanages into a lot of the just devoted of the ministries for the aging. So, you know, we went down memory lane here a little bit and had some fun time going on a number of your websites and reached out to a few of you also for some pictures. And it's just, you know, interesting, again, a good reminder. And as we then get into sort of the 2021 here and now where we are. So this is from GraceWorks Lutheran Services in Ohio, some neat pictures and great history on their website. So one of the neat things about the not-for-profits, I always tell people, if you can go to not-for-profit senior living website versus a for-profit operator, you can, you know, spot it in a millisecond. It's the about us, it's the history. And I think from the consumer standpoint, when we get to the discussion around what differentiates you, I think there's real appeal to that history and those roots when you look at your residents and your customer base. These are some neat pictures from Concordia here in Western Pennsylvania back to 1881, the Evangelical Lutheran Concordia Orphans and Old People's Home. Then we've got pictures from Lutheran Senior Services. They dug through their library and were able to pull some neat pictures of some residents as well as some of the buildings, convalescent home, the Aldenheim there in St. Louis, a hospital and asylum, pretty neat pictures there. Diacon, it definitely has a deep history on the orphans home, and they're at Topton, which is a community that they still actively operate, and these are some pictures of the orphans there at the Lutheran Orphans Home of Topton. Then Liberty Lutheran, you can see a picture of the Artman Home, that's outside of Philadelphia. The Artman Home for deserving Lutherans of all ages and both sexes. And then Lutheran Senior Life pulling a picture of their St. John Specialty Care Center. So love the names, love the pictures, just really interesting history. So it's, we didn't need to spend a whole lot of time on this, so that'd be a fascinating just sort of history, whole session in and of itself. But you know, wanted to set that stage as a reminder, because when we talk about the legacy moving forward and where we are today, it is a different world, and we've been scaled pretty dramatically from the private sector, and we're going to talk about what is the place of the not-for-profits moving forward. So we pulled data from today. So we looked at the history, where are we today? And I will tell you, a lot of this is from the Leading Age Ziegler 200 publication, so it's the largest 200 not-for-profits in the country. And you know, we're able to slice and dice that data by a number of different areas. And what we did today was we pulled out just the Lutheran-sponsored organization among that list. And what this graph points out is that, as designated by the L, and you can see we circled it there, the Lutheran-sponsored entities are actually the largest proportion in that LZ 200 population. So there's 31 of the 200 are Lutheran sponsored, and almost 50,000 units. You can see there. Then the next, the M is Methodist, P Presbyterian. So Presbyterian, Methodist, and Lutheran tend to be the most dominant among the 85% of the 200 that are faith-based sponsored in the LZ 200. So interesting to see that and look at the significant dominance that you have. And then when you look at, who are those largest, multi-site Lutheran-sponsored organizations, you can see here, we simply rank them from highest to lowest in that 200 ranking. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the LZ 200, it's not a ranking or listing based on good or bad or any type of a value orientation. It's simply based on size. And this ranking here is the number of market rate units. I'm going to give some statistics here in a moment around affordable housing, around home and community-based services. We know many of you providers are really active across much more than what you see on this table here in front of you. So, the second largest is the Evangelical Lutheran Good Samaritan Society, which we know is now part of Sanford Health. So that's ranked number 2 in the country out of the 200, and then down forth. So significant representation
hey, Lisa,
in that 200. Yeah.
Before you leave this page, it's just, we don't always produce this for you and others. You should be very proud of having 31, very proud of these list of names and where they're located in the country. And when we go to talk in a moment about affiliations and acquisitions, many of these organizations, as you all know, have been growing through those efforts. So I can't overemphasize the opportunity you have as leading not-for-profit providers to continue to grow and serve people as the leading systems in not-for-profit senior living. So when I make those comments later, we can think back to page 18. Back to you, Lisa.
So what is some additional data that we were able to pull from that? So of the 31 Lutheran organizations in that 200, about 20% also have grown or reported growth in the last time we collected data. So I will tell you that the 2020 publication reflects year-end 2019 data. We are in the final stages now of our 2021 survey collection, which will reflect year-end 2020 information. But so as organizations, you are continuing to grow. So 2 out of 10 reported growth in units, primarily through expansions, community repositionings. A few affiliations, but it's primarily that organic growth, building out existing footprints of what you have. And about half of you offer affordable housing for seniors. So while that initial table for the rankings didn't include the affordable housing, it is important to know because we know that that's a significant portion of many of your portfolios and ministries. So one of the things that we've seen grow in recent years is that third-party management to another provider. So when I say that's grown, when you look back 10, 15 years ago, there was a greater degree of third-party management from just for-profit third-party managers, so companies that did that. What we've seen is an increase in provider-to-provider management. Now, sometimes that may be a stepping stone to affiliation. Sometimes it's just bringing additional resources and sophistication to an organization that needs some additional support, but may not be interested or at a point that they want to affiliate. So that third-party management is something that we've seen grow and come from providers, and 3 out of 10 of you offer that to another organization. But we do a lot of work with the Chief Strategy Officer Network in our not-for-profit sector here, and those are the folks that are looking at growing organizations, maybe developing new business lines. And this topic is a popular one. I will say that even in the past 2 years, it's coming up more and more. So when we talk about partnership opportunities, even within the Lutheran affiliated families, I think that might be an opportunity for some dialogue. So a number of years ago, we also started collecting revenue. So again, these are just the LZ 200. This is not every Lutheran sponsored entity. But, I calculated it 2 ways here because we know that Good Samaritan Society is significant in terms of their revenue. So you can see with and without the Good Samaritan Society. So among the LZ 200, the average is 96 million. If any of you are curious for additional ways of slicing and dicing that, we can certainly do that. HCBS, growing popularity in terms, many of you are in it, 54% already have some type of home and community-based services platform, but we know that interest has really significantly increased year over year as we look through, gone through the pandemic, and particularly as we look at demographics, there's going to be continued demand for additional services. So whether it's home care, home health, hospice, PACE, those variety of different platforms. We also show revenue here, again, what's the average annual HCBS revenue. With Good Sam, it's 17 million, 13 million without. I will tell you 70% of the not-for-profit peers in that LZ 200 have revenues less than 10 million. So there's a good set of providers that are in some type of home and community-based services, but most are in it not from a 50, 60, $70 million annual revenue type of standpoint. Accreditation, 12% of all of you on the Lutheran side have at least one accredited community, CARF and JACO, the most common. And then we started asking questions such as outsourcing rehab. 8 out of 10 of you outsource rehab. That's pretty common with the larger senior living and care sector. It's a pretty common thing to outsource. These are the 3 companies that all of you have reported back are the most commonly used, although there are some others, but these are the most commonly reported. We started collecting information on technology. I didn't include all of that here, but just to share a peek into particularly the EMR, EHR platforms, Matrix Care, NetSmart, and Point Click Care are the most common among all of you on the Lutheran front. That's pretty consistent with what we see as the larger sector overall as well. And then 50% of you are in a former joint venture with another organization. I think for a number of you, that's with another Lutheran-sponsored entity. Some is just with another senior living provider in your market. Often that may be on the home and community-based services front. It may be a therapy joint venture, but those joint ventures are another example of a partnership and way that we can come together, develop more scale, not have to go it alone on different fronts. So about half of you on the Lutheran sponsored side of things are in some type of a joint venture. So that's just some data with the here and now and key trends. So now I'm going to tee up sort of the understanding the future landscape. So I would just say to you at this point, so we did a quick snapshot of the history, and we have an understanding of where the Lutheran footprint is today, at least in terms of your larger members. And then where do we need to be moving forward? So you're going to hear us talk about the for-profit sector. We know things are much more complex and competitive in a different way. Not to say that when we look at some of those old pictures, of the homes for the widows and orphans, it wasn't difficult. It was, but the care and services for seniors definitely has a different level of complexity, and we're not in it alone in terms of not-for-profit entities. So this is a slide that brings that home. This is a lot of information, and you may have seen this in different forms, but I wish we had, well, these categories wouldn't even be appropriate 100 years ago. It'd be much more simplistic, but it would be all not-for-profit. Not that there weren't some folks that were creative and probably made some money on things, 100 years ago, 75 years ago, but to bring home the point is, we have all of these, and this is housing as well as services, side of things, the categories on the left-hand side, and we organize this from the percentage that are not-for-profit sponsored. And you can see pretty quickly by that bar graph on the right-hand side, those bars that run from top to bottom, that we have been a sector that has morphed into a heavily, privatized sector. So whether we're talking home health, retirement communities, hospice care, and we see that continuing to grow. So again, when we talk about preserving that not-for-profit legacy, we need to understand where things are today and sort of where that train is heading. Demographics are a big part of this, the numbers and the interest of, hey, how can we, the entrepreneurial spirit and the investors and real estate developers and so forth, how can we have a piece of this pie right here in front of us? So, there is, again, great demand and great need. And again, this is not just in communities, that's one part of it. It's not just skilled nursing, that's one part of it. It's not just home care or home health. We, as a society, just as we did back then for the widows and the orphans, there's going to be great demand. And we know there's far fewer caregivers that are going to be able to provide that family caregiving in the future. We are also a population as you look ahead at the older adult population that's much sicker than in the past. When you look at, whether people like to admit it or not, when you've got the increased, mental health issues, but also the physical health issues around hypertension, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, all of those, that's some of what's going to be confronting from a needs standpoint, our future sector and your not-for-profit reaction to that. So that's part of the conversation moving forward. So Dan, I'm going to let you pick it up from here and share, what are we seeing in the current not-for-profit landscape and some potential threats and opportunities around that.
Yeah, but thanks, Lisa. I am going to have you just go back quickly the one page, and I wanted to just emphasize, please, I know you see a lot of demographic charts. This is 75 and up. What a great opportunity for you all as senior living providers to continue to grow in serving these demographics. We could do this for 80 and up or 85 and up. We just show you the 75 for now, and it would be the same slope, actually steeper for those two. And we know the for-profit market, whether it's real estate setting or home health and home care companies, are rapidly growing. So just keep this in mind. We get requested, this chart gets requested a lot. We're happy to send it to you. If we shorten it just to 2035, it would look even more profound. So for most of you leaders, this would be for the extension of your career from 2020 out to 2035. And we're hoping our not-for-profit organizations are able to respond, not just with bricks and mortar, but also in the home. So on the bricks and mortar front, our not-for-profit senior living growth has been primarily through expansions and repositionings and modernizations, and that is where our not-for-profit providers have done a wonderful job, great job. We just had a webinar for this morning for another very large expansion. Most of the $3 billion of capital that we raised last year, and it will be about $4 billion this year, is going into expansions, repositionings, and modernizations. We'll have 2 new campuses this year. We'd really love to see that be back to the old 8 to 10, and there'll be 15 to 20 in the sector. We usually finance about 2/3 of the new communities, but new community development has been very flat for not-for-profits because these recessions and pandemics pull back the risk taking, and because the sector generally pursues entry fee senior living communities, and they tend to be difficult to develop with a long gestation period. So right now, boards are not pushing our clients to pursue new campuses, where prior to the Great Recession of 2008 and 9, they were. They are, if you look at the third dash there, encouraging growth through affiliations and acquisitions, and that's accelerating both for Lutheran-sponsored organizations and non-Lutheran. We have 25 assignments around the country on sponsorship, transition, and M&A, and half of those are with not-for-profit senior living providers around the country, and some of those are Lutheran providers as we speak, which is great. However, that's the good news, but that's pulling energy away from new development work. There are a number of good developers out there to work with, and some of you are doing that, but most are putting their time and energy to existing campuses, affiliations and acquisitions, and into HCBS, as Lisa noted earlier. Note that as we look across the country, the plans vary dramatically. The Southeast, we just went over all of the projects in the Southeast with our team, and there's some huge expansions, 50, 100, 200 million. There is one new campus by Ted Goines Group, if Ted happened to be on, out on near the waterfront in North Carolina, but those are few and far between. If we go to for-profit, which is the private sector, they're responding to those demographics that you saw in a very proactive way and have been for 3 decades, but it really accelerated coming out of the Great Recession. And their product tends to be on smaller parcels, 2 to 10 acres, tends to be closer to the roadside, and is almost always rental now. So they have left the entry fee community product to you all in the not-for-profit marketplace, but we know that gestation period is longer. So you can expect to continue to see for-profits building out rental. As we come out of the pandemic, there's an enormous amount of capital standing by. They watch the NIC occupancy rates very closely, and when you see markets get back up to 87, 88, 90% occupancy, which they will, with the demographic wave that we highlighted, you'll see the for-profit marketplace continue their pattern of building out IL, AL, and memory care, not nursing, but IL, AL, memory care. And then the separate market, because most of the home and community-based in the for-profit sector are distinct home health and home care companies like Amedisys, which is public, and thousands that are smaller than them continue to push to grow, and it gets written up in all the trade pubs every day with all the emphasis on serving people in their home and the hope for greater reimbursement there and technology. Now, there's a number of not-for-profits doing a good job in home and community-based. We have over 25 that have more than 10 million in revenue among the leading age Ziegler 200, and more than 50% that are active in HCBS, but just know the for-profit side will be pushing there also. Next page, Lisa. So with those pressures in mind, and we usually roll through this more smoothly, but we'll just put it out there one time, the growing pressures that are accelerating senior living consolidation in the not-for-profit market. You can take your eyes across the page and see the themes we've added, but right now, coming out of COVID, complexities of healthcare with the emphasis on COVID has definitely pressured not-for-profits, in particular smaller, those without large balance sheets, and those that had a higher amount of skilled nursing. So as I noted, we have a number of assignments now, and almost all of the not-for-profit ones are single sites looking to join a larger, stronger organization, or some peer-to-peer mergers, but most are single sites looking to join a larger organization. You factor in complexity of healthcare with leadership turnover. So we know there's a large number of CEOs that will be retiring in the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. That will always be happening, but it's really amplified right now, in particular among Lutheran providers in the Northeast and in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey area, who have all talked about it among themselves, that there's going to be a number of new CEOs in those markets in the next 1, 3, and 5 years. So that will offer up opportunity for partnerships and consolidation just among Lutherans. But that ability to attract talent and technology, which is also impacting the health system side, is just going to continue combined with the black competition box, which really implies the for-profit side. Lisa, I'll go to the next page. So look how many not-for-profits have changed ownership since 2010. You may have seen this from us before, but it's really profound, and this excludes in the totals Evangelical Good Sam joining Good or Sanford. That would take us up over 900. So by the end of this year, we know we'll be over 800 not-for-profits that have changed hands. And you see at the bottom of the page some of the Lutheran affiliations going into the Lutheran systems. Concordia has been growing, who we don't show here, with a number of acquisitions. You see that Concord joining Life Enriching, which was Methodist. Great example of the ones we'd love to see. National Lutheran, Augsburg joining National Lutheran in that Metro DC Baltimore area, Lutheran to Lutheran. It'll be great to see National Lutheran continue to grow. And then the peer-to-peer merger of Augustana and Elam Care, Augustana being historically Lutheran Missouri Synod, Elam Care being fundamental Christian, but that was a peer-to-peer merger in the Minneapolis marketplace. Next page, Lisa. And I failed to mention the bullet, as she noted earlier, that we just saw another leading industry professional join a not-for-profit to become their head of strategy. So we're over 50 now of multi-facility providers that have added some form of head of strategy, head of business development, usually full-time, but sometimes for at least a 50% FTE. So back to these ownership changes, we're up to 54% that are not-for-profit to for-profit. And that's been the disposition and pruning of dated and economically obsolete freestanding nursing or some challenged CCRC LPCs, but most of that's been the disposition of dated nursing, which is going to start to slow down because there's not many left among you all as multi-facility providers. We've had almost 25% not-for-profit to not-for-profit, like Cassia Augustana, like Augsburg into National Lutheran, and we expect to see that accelerate. We're going to update this pie chart and show it just since 2015, and you should see the green box then be larger. So a lot of the for-profit to not-for-profit to for-profit occurred back in that 2010 post-recession period. Closures are dated nursing homes, almost always, many in rural areas, but 10%. So that's over 70 closures. A lot of older Catholic nursing homes also close. And then for-profit and not-for-profit, that's great to see, 10%. That means our not-for-profits purchasing, that's an acquisition, usually of a freestanding for-profit in their marketplace that fits into their strategy. We're working right now on 2 very large acquisitions. They're not Lutheran, but they'll be for-profit CCRCs coming over to the not-for-profit side by proactive growing systems. So we know this trend will continue, and it's what's causing the whole not-for-profit marketplace to not have net growth. So net growth of not-for-profit senior living is only at 1%. Even with the demographic waves we have, the for-profit market had been averaging 10%. That average is about 8%. Looking in the rearview mirror, it'll probably drop to 6% and bottom out there on year-over-year inventory growth. Nick tracks that very closely, but not-for-profits a net 1% from, and that's mostly from expansions and not new campuses. Did you miss a page? That's our next page there, correct, Lisa?
Yeah, no, I was just jumping ahead to that 1%, so we'll go to that later. Go ahead.
Okay. So now let's talk about the role of faith and sponsorship transition, or faith-based sponsorship transitions. 80% of the not-for-profit to not-for-profit have been faith-based. Now, I just gave Augsburg International Lutheran as Lutheran to Lutheran and Cassia being 2 separate denominations, but those are 2 great examples. So 52% were with another faith-based organization and 20% the same. So we know with the Lutheran systems, the 31 that we noted, and then a large number of Lutheran single site, that we hear and we ask, how important is the Lutheran sponsorship? And it's important, but there are many other drivers if we went back to the driver page, including geography. So if you were in the Twin Cities, there's more than 15 multi-facility providers. Augustana and Elam happen to be 2 medium-sized but large ones coming together. They're very large with significant scale. And they would all tell you that they were like-minded, had similar missions. They're going to be able to continue to honor their faith histories, and the 2 coming together in that metro market aligned better and made sense, and so that they weren't going to make Lutherans say the driver, especially since they could maintain the history, as just one example. So we know geography will play in, and we know like-minded missions will play in, and management teams will play in. So we suggest to you as Lutheran providers, be thinking in advance how important the Lutheran sponsorship is if you want to get ahead on positioning yourselves for preserving the Lutheran heritage. Given that you have 31 of the 200, it's a great opportunity. And we didn't put the national map in, but as we know, the majority of those are in the Northeast, and Midwest. If we had to say of those 31, Lisa, they scan those 2 markets, probably 80% are in those 2 markets. Next page. So I mentioned a few of these examples, but just take a glance here down the page. We just had a good example published at the top, Living Care Retirement Community in Yakima, Washington, joining Human Good. Human Good's now an amalgamation of American Baptist and Presbyterian principally. Living Care Retirement Community had mission and fundamental Christian orientation as a main driver, and they ended up matching up with Human Good the best out of the interested parties. They moved early and are a healthy organization, so we credit them with that. And Human Good did have an affordable property in their market. But I bet on this phone call, only 10% of you even noticed that in the press, but it was a big deal for them. They're the only not-for-profit in Yakima, Washington. It adds 1 more to Human Good, and it was faith-based to faith-based. Covia joining Front Porch is a big deal for everyone on the West Coast. Front Porch has a heritage of Lutheran embedded in the system, going all the way back to the Internex merger. For those veterans of the industry that remember, California Lutheran Homes was one of 3 that came together to form Front Porch, or Internext, in 1999, and then they renamed themselves Front Porch. Covia is Episcopal sponsored, so now they bring that heritage together with the Methodist Lutheran that were rooted in Front Porch. So now those 2, Human Good and Front Porch, are both over $450 million. They'll be approaching $500 million systems. and will be the dominant not-for-profit systems in California, impacting all of the providers in California, where we believe we'll see gradual an acceleration of consolidation as others react to these two large systems on recruiting of management, on competition in the market, on negotiation with the state, and so on. So you can glance down the page, go down, take your eyes down to Albright joining Asbury. That was Methodist to Methodist in the Mid-Atlantic. Great example, came out of relationships and histories of folks knowing each other. Albright brought additional services, as you see on the right-hand side, to Asbury of PACE and pharmacy, and that executive leader from Albright became the president of their HCBS PACE, and they include pharmacy in that. So it worked out well for everyone to broaden that platform and maintain their Methodist heritage, which they're very proud of. And down at Sunset joining Otterbein, just want to note, Sunset moved early. That was driven by retirement. They were actually rated in the A category, and that was not faith-based driven. Otterbein is Methodist. Sunset wanted to join one of the larger players in their geographic region and interviewed a few and picked Otterbein. Those are the rarities right now for somebody that healthy to move, but they had a retiring CEO. And then at the bottom of the page, we mentioned Augsburg joining National Lutheran. And Lisa, do you just want to comment on Lutheran Crossing with Lutheran Social Ministries? Yep, you're on mute. Nope, we lost her. Then I'll keep going, Lisa, assuming everyone can hear me. So that was just one more example of your Lutheran organization in New Jersey. So if we go to the next page, we have examples of all of these. This is that growth we were talking about. And you see the not-for-profit at the bottom right hand at approximately a little bit more than 1%. Take your eyes back on the blue line to 2006 and 7 and 8, when not-for-profits were building new locations. 4% growth is healthy. 3 to 4%, it's perfectly fine if the private sector reacts more quickly. But the recession dented the growth spirits of the not-for-profits, and they did not come back until 14 or 15. You see the line was moving up. Again, most of that was expansions and acquisitions and affiliations, but it would have been acquisitions coming in. And then we dipped down a bit in 17, then we get to the pandemic, and that's now pulled everyone back. In the meantime, for-profit rotated to the orange line, which is IL, not AL, being the leading driver of growth. When they use the word at NIC, when they track the data, primarily IL or primarily AL. And the primarily IL accelerated in the second half of the decade and would have stayed, frankly, up at that 12 to 14% if it weren't for the pandemic. You heard me say with those two lines blended together, you can see it's about 8%. It should drop down to about 6% at its low, maybe 5%, but it's going to come back with a vengeance as the inventory available in the market fills up coming out of COVID, just driven by the demographics. So we can guarantee you in each of your markets, in particular in large metro, you're going to continue to have competition from brand new, fresh, for-profit IL, AL memory care, and they're going to start bringing more and more technology and bells and whistles. There's a large number of younger management teams that are managing the assets for all of the dollars that come into that market by the REITs and the investment platforms. And the younger management teams are more tech savvy and want to bring in all the resident engagement tools and other tools of that nature to be fresh as they go to build what they know will be 20-year assets for the future. So keep that in mind on what your competition will be, in particular in major metro. Next page. So however, we know we had COVID. We know it led to occupancy declines. You see the not-for-profit side holding up dramatically better because of the great product offering you all have, in particular when it's a continuum of care, in particular when it's entry fee. And so we know many of you have nursing, and we know that has been impacted more, but for-profit is principally rental, so the average age is higher. They have greater turnover, and it's easier to move out, obviously. And we've already watched our entry fee not-for-profit LPC CCRCs respond. The low was hit anywhere from December, but more likely January, February. And we monitor over 100 credits on our Ziegler credit surveillance calls, and to a T, we're hearing every entry fee, virtually every entry fee community say that they bounced off their low and are seeing an acceleration in interest and sales. So we'll expect to see the not-for-profit line gradually move back up to an average in the 90s, but our stronger communities are already back, but we know that doesn't reflect everyone. So you see in the bottom left, the occupancy levels for CCRCs at around 84.4, but majority skilled all the way down to 74.1. We clearly understand you've been pressured in that area, and those are the credits that we're keeping the closest eye on as people work hard to turn things around. Lisa, anything to add, more to add on this slide? Oh, we still can't hear you. So let's open it up for, if you go to the next page, we're at that 20-minute mark for questions and discussion. What I'm going to do is have Lisa dial me, and I'll conference her into my line, and she'll be able to hear. So hang on one sec, everyone. Lisa, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You guys can hear me?
I can.
Who knows? All of a sudden, my audio decided not to work. But so I will share with you the sort of the background of these questions, but then we definitely want to entertain any questions that you may have, and I think some things came through the chat box. But these are discussion questions. We don't need to necessarily tackle all of these today, but we can if you have thoughts. But these are also, I think, good questions for you to think through as a leadership team, as LSA membership, you know, even going back with your boards and so forth. So I'll just read through these quickly, and then we can go, you know, and look at the chat box and open up to some dialogue and Q&A. So, you know, the first one I just put out there, what do you see as key steps needed to stay relevant and vibrant moving forward? So given again, the opportunities, as well as, you know, the pressure points and competition out there, and what is the key to the future? And it's not going back to what things looked like pre-pandemic. It's really, you know, you determining what that future looks like, and not, you know, returning to the normal, because we know things need to look different moving forward. And then what is that strategic advantage of the not-for-profit faith-based heritage? I just, you know, referenced earlier, just, you know, the simple act even of, you know, what you have on your websites is your history and the about us. You know, those are important storytelling elements that are very unique to the not-for-profit sector, and particularly those faith-based organizations like all of you. And then what's the role of governance play in preserving this, you know, not-for-profit senior living you know, legacy? And, you know, we know all of you can be the conduit to your boards. And so what does the board play in terms of helping propel you forward? But where potentially can they hold you back? And where's that appropriate tension within your organizations? And then is there that opportunity to collaborate further as Lutheran-sponsored entities? So whether it's, again, the joint ventures, whether it's, you know, we talked about affiliations, whether it's, you know, maybe just, you know, more informal partnerships, not even to that full extent. But then again, you know, not just with Lutherans, but other faith-based providers. We know there's many successful examples of that out there. So we just put these out there for you to think about, to sort of stir up the creative juices, I would say, and we'll leave them with you. They'll be in the final slide deck as they are shared back with all of you. So I think at this point, maybe what we can do is, you know, take a look at the chat and, you know, get into some of the questions here. And Dan, I'll throw some out to you, and then we can sort of, you know, tag team back and forth. But there was a question just asking to comment on the skilled nursing trends nationally. We didn't do a deep dive into that. But Dan, do you want to start off about, you know, what are we seeing on the skilled nursing side with skilled nursing beds nationally, and what are, and then we'll get into a separate question around trends around boards. But skilled nursing. If
you take us back to the occupancy side, so just 2 slides earlier, we'll sit on that while we speak. You see the not-for-profit, or on the right-hand side, you see the nursing care just within CCRCs was down to 76.5, and then 74 for the whole country. The trends are the for-profit nursing home operators, which are a distinct group. They are not the IL, AL memory care group. and AL memory care folks want nothing to do with nursing, frankly, on the for-profit side, and they'll continue to grow. Those folks move around in ASHA and Argentum, and the skilled nursing side moves around in ACA. And those owners of skilled nursing have been the buyers. They continue to grow, and they've created scale within the skilled nursing marketplace. They get heavy or significant financing from REITs and investment platforms. You've read in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times how private equity entered into the space. The operators generally are well-intended. We know many of them. You've heard about how many of them come from New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Chicago. But their product tends to be 70 to 75% Medicaid, and then they always tend to have Medicare services, as we know, in those units, and they tend to own a lot of ancillary businesses serving and selling into those organizations, pharmacy, therapy, food service, et cetera. Well, they continue to buy. So you all should know that the prices for nursing homes are back to where they were at the start of the pandemic, and they're comfortable with that model. The Genesis, if you follow that market at all, just got bought by Allure out of New York, and they picked up a number of ancillary businesses with that. And then ProMedica, the health system, picked up a few also. So I'm just noting to you that structurally, those groups are very comfortable with freestanding nursing. Our not-for-profits have been releasing freestanding nursing, and those groups are almost always the buyers around the country. If you go out west, you pick up Ensign, where the founders have a Mormon heritage, and they're actually doing very well as a public company, and a couple of other providers like that out west. So that will continue to play out. Then when you get to the continuum settings that you all have tended to gravitate to and grow out on larger settings, almost to a T, folks have been refining their nursing footprint, reducing it when they can as part of projects, and going to single room occupancy and resident-centered care settings that really work nicely in a full continuum setting, and reducing down the exposure to direct pay admits, in particular in markets where the Medicare Advantage programs are aggressive and where Medicare Advantage has put pressure on net pricing. And as part of that, one of the trends in nursing are in a number of states, the institutional special needs plans called ISNPs have surfaced and have provided a good option to get into the risk-bearing side of the business and be economically tied to an ISNP so you can capture a greater revenue share of the residents you're serving. So that's playing out in Missouri, where we have Lutheran Senior Services, who's a part owner of an ISNP, playing out in the Twin Cities, in Colorado, in Ohio, in Virginia, in Florida, and soon to be California, for ISNPs available to not-for-profits. Lisa, would you like to add anything more on?
Yeah, we have some CFO hotline data from March on the skilled nursing beds, and we know that there were a lot of 50% of not-for-profits took beds or whole units, wings, offline this past year, and some of that was just a function of your occupancy's down. Do you need that entire wing or unit up and running, and particularly with all the staffing pressures? So I think that word temporary is the key one there. As Dan mentioned, there's been a lot of what we call sort of right sizing on that skilled nursing side. A lot of it's been the conversion of the semi-private to private units, not fully, but we've definitely seen that coming out of the pandemic. I think there's going to be an even greater push for that. A lot of the designs around the small house models or greenhouse. But so we are seeing, and when you look at the total number of beds and units in the country, the number of beds has been on the decline, and there have been some of those closures, but as Dan mentioned, we see more of the sales to those for-profit private sector buyers than we do see the closures. Now, we also had a question just around trends for boards of not-for-profits, and Lillian, I think that came from you. I don't know if you have specific topics you want us to cover with that. The one thing I just will say is that we've been doing a lot of board education this past year, and in a typical year we probably do 50 to 60 board presentations. just strategy trends like we're doing here today. This past year, now that we've got the benefit of Zoom and virtual board meetings, we've been doing even more. Some weeks we're doing 2 to 3 a week with different management teams. So I would say, there's probably boards in 2 categories right now. Some that are sitting and waiting for the pandemic to pass and are still focused on the COVID response and so forth, so have their heads down and they're in the weeds. Others that are recognizing, okay, that's still going on, but we need to get our heads up and look ahead because things are moving very fast and becoming much more complex. So, I think the board education piece is so significant. So I would say that there's increased trend of the leadership team saying, now what? And let's lead you into some education, make sure our boards are aware and we're making the right strategic decisions. Another question around what other denominations or faith-based providers are likely partners for Lutherans. It really has run the gamut. I mean, we even see Catholic to Jewish coming together. We've seen Methodist to Lutheran and Mennonite and so forth. So I'm not sure that, and Dan, I'll let you comment. Dan is good with the history of all of the faith-based entities and senior living in the country, but we really have examples across all of them, and what it ends up coming down to is fit too. I did a session earlier today just around the affiliations partnerships conversation, and it was around, we touched on this faith-based piece, and at the end of the day, I think sometimes we have more in common than we don't, than differences among some of the different faith-based groups. But Dan, I'll let you comment on your perspective with that.
While I speak, Lisa, can you go back to the ranking that shows them at 31? It'll just help us talk. Charlotte, will I get in trouble if I say tongue-in-cheek the most likely are Missouri Synod and ELCA coming together? That's a good one to reflect back on.
I would try different denomination stuff, Dan. Stay with the question.
You go, right. So then you go to Methodist, Presbyterian, and then it drops down. So then you get to a number of others. UCC is a good example, and they tend to be open to other denominations. But as Lisa was noting, it's market by market. So as I try and answer the question, think market to market, and then people just absolutely play into it. So who are the people, who's involved, who do they know in the market, who's comfortable with who? So we noted Cassia earlier, where the organizations were comfortable with each other for a variety of reasons, and some board members knew each other. There were other Lutheran organizations in the Twin Cities that were very respected, but that didn't surface as a logical fit for a lot of different reasons. If you put all the criteria, board, management, what management team members are going to play, what roles, financial standing, approach to financing projects, approach to delivery of care, and so on, and you can keep going down the line. So I would say, as Lisa noted, it's just wide open, market by market, although mainline Protestant denominations tend to match up fairly well, as we noted, with Front Porch and Human Good. So if you look at the two of those, between them, they, I believe, have 7 different denominations, maybe it's 6 across that organization. So so for you all, for preserving the Lutheran heritage, I would just be getting out in front and saying, where can we get together as Lutheran-sponsored organizations first? Make sure you don't look back and say, I wish I had talked to so-and-so sooner, and that would have allowed us to maintain a Lutheran heritage. But then from there, be reaching out to other like-minded organizations in your markets, because we know scale is going to matter. And then ideally, you'll have a Lutheran-sponsored organization as the surviving entity, or at least be able to maintain the roots in a very visible way within a merged organization like they do at Cassia and a couple of the others. But feel free to add on to that if you'd like, or if anyone else wants to point out a combination that's worked out for them across denominational lines.
The one thing I will say, and this is a research example, but it speaks to the trend that we're seeing, is we are transitioning this slide to a bit of a check all that apply. because we have a big spreadsheet that has every organization. Well, what's their, what's the faith-based heritage? Well, as the interfaith mergers come together, it's, well, they're more than one, and so, often as part of that affiliation conversation, that whole identity piece obviously comes to the forefront. So will we stay Lutheran? Will we stay Methodist? Or will we stay Mennonite? Whatever it is. And I would say, generally, at least for a period of time when it's not for profit to not for profit, that is respected, among most of the not-for-profit peers. When it's a not-for-profit to for-profit, generally that's a little bit of a harder conversation to maintain some of that faith-based root and heritage.
That's where the naming is a big deal. So I just happened to talk to Kevin McFeely at what had been Tacoma Lutheran, and they've changed their name in the last 2 months to Alicio with a small e by definition. Hopefully that name Alicio resonates with some of you on the call. There was a lot of thought put into that. They had over 30 possibilities, and that now becomes a broader umbrella name for them to grow in the Metro Seattle market with a name that he believes has a heritage or rooted connection to both the Lutheran heritage and the Bible. So we'll see more and more of that. Cassia is another good example that has a biblical meaning also. So working on those type of platform names, I think, will be helpful. As we know, ecumenical definitely gets brought up and is used a lot, and we'd rather, I suppose, we'd rather see quality not-for-profits grow with a faith-based rooting in today's society versus waiting too long. But if you can accomplish Lutheran to Lutheran, that would be great.
Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing just because I'm getting a pop-up here, and we can continue the dialogue. There was just a further question on the board. Dan, can you comment what happens at the board level with affiliation? So if you affiliate in with another, or there's a merger of equals, are the boards evenly populated? If you are smaller joining a bigger, do you get board representation? Does the board dissolve? What are the trends?
It's a great question. We just went over this with another party yet last night, and we used 5 examples. That, we do a lot of research, and that's on the docket for our team and our interns this year because it takes a bit of time. What we're going to do on those, Lisa, I know you quit sharing, but I was going to have you put up that example page. We just walked through and went group by group. So we believe Cassia and Augustana and Elam totally viewed it as a merger of equals. But what usually happens is a reference to the revenue base and maybe the size. And where it works best is if you say, we are a merger of equals, however, we got to make certain accommodations. And we're putting this piece of work together now where we talk about how did it end up for management, how did it end up for the board. And just so you all hear this, it's not uncommon that the smaller organization will end up with more management positions solely out of the reality of the situation and say the retiring CEO. That was the case at Human Good with John Cochran becoming the CEO. His COO was very strong, so he became the COO. The CFO came from Human Good. HR came from B Group. One other person of the top 5 or 6 came from B Group. It ended up being 4 and 2, but ABHA was actually the larger organization. They all viewed that as okay because they had a retiring CEO. The board was more even with one more board member for Human Good. And we made this comment to another executive yesterday who's looking at doing exactly what we're talking about here, doesn't involve Lutherans, and noted it's very important at the time, but if done right and everyone comes to agreement, things march on very quickly. We're also used to saying Human Good now. We rarely say ABHA or B Group. B Group was the old Southern California Presbyterian Homes. They are moving forward as Human Good, and they've done a great job doing that. It's now 5 years later, but I'd say within 2 years, they would tell you everything felt like Human Good. But back to the board, you just work through how you want to look later. I think, Lisa, we'd say more often than not, the merger uses it as a chance to streamline down to a smaller board. So that we have seen where one might have had 13, one might have had 15, and they say, after the merger, we're going to be 100 million or 200 million. Let's just get the parent board to only be 9 and then have some of the other players go on the affordable housing board and the management company board and have the parent board be smaller. So that actually has happened fairly often. But we act as a facilitator to get to these, to help facilitate these points, and almost always people work through it and find agreement on the board side on who's the right folks to move forward. But often there'll be one person that is touchy that we hear about later, and people usually work through it. So it's just using common sense to get to the right spot is what you're hearing me say.
So I think we're at time. Charlotte, do you want to make any closing remarks? We appreciate your time, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Dan and Lisa. That was fabulous. We could have kept going on for a long period of time. And I'm sure they're both happy to talk with folks afterwards if you'd like. Please be on the lookout for an email from Emily, which will be a recording along with all the presentation, the slides that we went through today. So thank you again, Dan and Lisa. That was terrific as always. And please stay tuned for our future Strength and Service series that we'll be offering. So thank you again.